I often get the question, what should we do? For me, the real issue is just start. Do something. Start.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, help the old lady to cross the street. That's good. That's contributing to social capital, and that will lead to something,
Well, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this newest podcast in the series, Getting Serious with Woody Wade. I'm Woody Wade, and my guest today is André Hoffmann, who is the vice chairman of Roche Holding. Not just that, though, because he's also a leading figure and thought leader in the drive for sustainability and corporate responsibility, which ranges far beyond just one company, obviously. But as the great-grandson of the founder of Roche, Hoffmann La Roche at that time, André has overseen the company's transformation into one of the world's most innovative pharmaceutical companies, and all the time maintaining a very deep commitment to social and environmental impact, which we're going to talk about later. His work, as I mentioned before, spans far beyond just this little family business, and it has included significant roles in the World Economic Forum, the Hoffmann Institute at INSEAD, the business school in Fontainebleau, and at the Fondation Tour du Vala, which is here in Switzerland and is dedicated to wetland conservation. This book, The New Nature of Business, was co-authored by André and Peter Vanham, and it offers really a compelling vision for how companies can achieve long-term prosperity by aligning their practices with the needs of nature and society and future generations as well, of course. Lots of case studies in the book highlighting the work of global organizations and companies. And what it does is basically highlight how the future of business is really deeply rooted in sustainability. So today what I thought we would do would be to explore the intersection between sustainability and Switzerland's what Switzerland has to offer, in particular an entrepreneurially oriented organization that wants to come here and set up, and maybe doesn't necessarily have sustainability foremost in mind because they're not necessarily at that stage of their development, but maybe they should. And so with that, I'd like to welcome you very much to this podcast, André. And maybe let's just start with some background, some history. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to feel so strongly about this subject? Because the easiest thing in the world, I think, would have been when you finished your MBA a few years ago, I'm supposing. The easiest thing in the world would have been to join the family company, but it looks to me like you've decided to take a slightly different path. And how did that come about?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me on that podcast. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's a real pleasure to be able to talk about the issues that I really like. And perhaps I need to talk a little bit about me as well to introduce this.
If you don't mind.
No, of course not. I grew up, in fact, it's one of my favorite subjects. I grew up in the south of France, in the Camargue. My father was a zoologist. He also did not join the family business. And that's a tradition in the family that we have a tendency of employing professional managers rather than getting ourselves executively active. So he was a zoologist. He was, in fact, an ornithologist, a specialist about birds, and in particular bird migration, and moved to the Camargue, which is the delta of the Rhone River, in 1947 on the Mediterranean. And I grew up a couple of years later there, and nature was always something that we had as a conversation piece, obviously. But then, of course, there was also the other side of the equation, which is the family business, which was an important part of our daily life. My father was himself a vice chairman of the company for a number of years. And we tried to sort of over the years to develop the respect of both sides. I mean, the thing that unites both agendas, both files, if you want. One is nature. How do we protect it? How do we develop it in the long term? only by understanding what science is telling us, what is happening, and how can we sort of understand science. And on the other side, you have how do you treat patients in the best possible manner? How do you innovate healthcare through science as well? And so this double agenda is something that influenced me rather early on.
Right. Interesting. And at what point did you decide that you wanted to actually develop the things that you've stuck your paws into all the way up to your elbows?
So I think there was also a very open house at home. We had a lot of scientists coming to visit from Switzerland, but also from other parts of the world. My mother was born of Russian parents in the Czech Republic and was naturalized Austrian by the time she met my father. And we had a very I would call it a humanistic culture at home. We did a lot of things with friends and together, and I think that influenced me in the long run quite clearly.
Right.
Thinking about the other is something that I've been trying to teach to my children as well, and I think it's an important consideration of how to deal with society.
Yes.
And then we grow over the years, we come up into our responsibilities. I started working in the city in London. I did my MBA. I joined the board of the company, while at the same time being involved in what's happening in the Camargue, and in particular in the institute that my father started, which is now owned by a foundation, which I chair. And over the years, you realize that in fact all this is very united.
Right.
It's a bit of an easy thing to say, but we are all humans, and we all have to live in the same environment. We have to share.
Right.
So for many years, the success in business was associated with private wealth. We all know now that in the planetary limit thinking, you need to be able to allocate resources to everybody. Otherwise, there is no stability possible.
Yeah.
So the thesis of the book, the new nature of business, is based on this idea that if you really want to create sustainable prosperity, we will need to distribute richness, but also distribute work and also distribute responsibility in a more open manner.
Right. Does that imply that the companies who take that path also need to communicate that they're doing it? Or is it enough that they do it and then just hope that the world notices? Or does that matter?
I shouldn't say that to a communication specialist like you are, but frankly, it's an obvious thing. If you don't look at the common good, you're not going to be successful in the long term.
Right.
So our family company does not exist to create dividends and to increase the share price. It exists to serve the patient. Our purpose is finding new therapeutic solution to unmet medical need. We work for the patients, not for the shareholders. And that's something that a family business can say with aplomb, because we do happen to be the owners of the business. And so we can talk about that in a little bit more conviction than perhaps just financial investors who have a different agenda.
Yeah, although that's a different angle. I mean, I can imagine there would be some shareholders meeting, some annual general stockholders meeting where that message wouldn't go down very well.
Well, it would go down very badly if we were not successful. But my thesis is that you are more successful if you serve your purpose than if you just focus on the financial consequences.
Right.
The short-term profit maximization mantra, doxa, which is the things we've been taught at school. You run a business by growing the bottom line and the profit and loss. That's not necessarily the best way to run a business. When you take a decision of asset allocation and of risk management, you should understand why you exist. Companies are not there to make money, they're there to serve their purpose. Yes. And so we spend a lot of time in the family trying to define what our purpose should be. And the purpose we've settled on is doing today what the patients need next.
Yeah.
So it implies that you are profitable, because if you're not profitable, you can't exist as a company.
Right.
It also implies that you invest into the future so that you don't distribute everything you have immediately. But it also, and I think even more importantly, focuses on what the needs of the healthcare market is.
Yes.
And that is saving lives.
Yeah, of course. Would your advice be any different if you were talking to, let's say, an entrepreneur that had only 10 employees and was in more of a startup mode?
Well, I chair two juries who give prizes in terms of venture capital, and that's a conversation we have with our potential laureates all the time. Yeah? They say, well, my business is to create something that is actually sustainable, and for that I need to make money.
Yes.
And that making money becomes more and more important. But I would contend that if you start a business, it's not just because you want to fill the bank account, it's because you also want to fulfill some sort of responsibility towards the society at large.
Right.
If I sell car, I sell mobilities, I need to understand why this car and why there and in that way. And that's not just a question of profitability. If profitability was the only one, all cars would be the same. And they're not, because we are different. We are humans. We work in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking that if an entrepreneurial company actually needs to generate the financial resources in order to then make this kind of mindset shift. Now, all along, I guess, it's possible for them to say the reason why we set up in the first place is to serve some kind of greater purpose than just making money and increasing our share price, when we eventually have shares that are on the market. If it would be the main focus of a company in its very earliest stages to fulfill these other goals and to leave the financial considerations aside, I'm guessing that there's a greater risk that they don't survive to make those kinds of lofty goals. What do you think about that? I mean,
I'm going to add a layer in what you said. What to me seems important is that we are in society, we are in life, we are in business because we want to be happy.
Yes.
We want to be able to fulfill ourselves. And being happy does not mean having the new Mercedes. Right? It means being in a situation where you can exploit your potential in a way that corresponds to the group. I think nobody is happy on his own. The drinking whiskey in front of the television, you can only do that from time to time. After a while, so what we want is to contribute. We want to be able to be part of a continuum. And some of us, entrepreneurially, want to do that by providing goods that society needs.
Yes.
And that's good. That's excellent. That's a wonderful motive to be able to move, to get out of bed in the morning. And yes, you do need to retribute it, about the word in English, reimburse or whatever.
Yeah,
the money that's invested to you at the beginning.
Yes.
You need to look after it. But that's not the only aim. The reason you're starting your business is because it's your idea, it's your fulfillment, it's your dream. You go and live it. Of course, if you're unprofitable, you won't be a success. That's something we have to accept.
Yeah.
But then we have to, I use the word success, then we can go one step back. What is success? And that's what I was trying to say before. Success is happiness, individual and collective happiness. Yeah. And if we don't get into that direction, we are likely to lose our way. If the only reason we suddenly are in business is to maximize a short-term profit, it's narrow. It's more dangerous.
Right. I would agree with that. I think if you were to talk to any random entrepreneur, not like they're randomly walking around everywhere, but they all start with some kind of a dream, which is not to get filthy rich or to it's not about the financial side of things. That's possibly a happy side effect for them personally. But what they do originally is they see a need for something that they know how to fulfill, or they think they can build a solution for a problem, right? So I am 100% behind what you're saying. I was just thinking, yeah, but you have to, you can't just go through life dreaming. You have to actually, generate some money with which you can actually make these things happen in the practical world, right?
In essence, you have to fulfill your business plan.
Yes.
So the original idea on the business plan is something that is your passion, your conviction, and you move into that business. After that, of course, it has to be profitable. I'm saying it again. This is a business. It's not an NGO. You can't just live on people's charity.
Right.
You actually have to deserve this. Now, where on the other side of the equation, where you should think is, how do we define success? Yes. Is success really the full bank account? Is success really materiality? Yeah. Or is success on a different level? If I succeed in making a business that's financially viable while satisfying my purpose, that's success. Not many people can do that, and not people can even claim that.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like.
Well, let's talk about Switzerland as an environment for that to happen. You've seen a giant corporation based in Switzerland, and so you know what Switzerland has to offer to a company that's well established and has its own ideas of what should be successful, but also these smaller companies who see in Switzerland some kind of a fertile ground for them to establish themselves here rather than somewhere else, if it's a choice. How would you compare the two? Is Switzerland better if you're a big, well-established company, or is it more favorable if you are a small startup?
So that's a question that goes a bit outside of the borders of Switzerland. What are the ingredients needed for business success? What are the ingredients needed for entrepreneurial cultures? And Switzerland ticks an awful lot of boxes. I mean, it's politically stable. It has a well-functioning banking system. It has excellent infrastructures, outstanding universities. And I'm not just saying that. This is absolutely the case. If you look at the different teaching institutions around Lac Léman, or if you look at the valley around the Rhine in Basel or even Zurich, I mean, there are things happening there which do not happen somewhere else. And this sort of societal stability and sustainability and capacity at investing into the future is very propitious for enterprises. We are a worldwide company. About 3% of our turnover is in Switzerland. Why are we still there? For two reasons. One, because we are a Swiss company and we're very proud of that.
Right.
And also because we do have the framework conditions to continue to thrive. And Switzerland offers that in many ways, shape, or forms. So as a young entrepreneur, I would, of course, be slightly, by the way, I don't mean young, I mean as a new entrepreneur, because there are some old people who are very good as well. So I will be frightened by the cost of everything, because, of course, the standard of living is very high in Switzerland.
Yes.
But I will also be able to resource my model in a way which I could not do in other places, because talent is there, and there is an awful lot of understanding of the entrepreneurial thinking.
Yeah. So it's favorable to both kinds of organizations then, right?
The big companies active in Switzerland are very happy in here. And until the framework condition change, if they ever change.
Yeah.
But the thing I like the most about Switzerland, it's this idea. In German they say klein aber fein. It's small, but it works. And that allows you to better understand what the value creation phenomenon actually is. The idea that you only look in terms of finance is, I think, looking at a very small part of what's happening. When you do anything as a company or as an organization or as a government, you need to look at the consequences of our actions on the three big capitals. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to develop in the book. We need to look at the social, at the human, and at the natural capital. The social capital is how do we organize ourselves in society? What are our rights and obligations towards each other? What's the social contract? The human capital is each one of us individual. I was talking about the happiness in front of the TV. That's not really what we're talking about, but we're talking about everybody's self-realization. And then the third one is nature. But nature, not the panda, not the tiger. Nature, life, what's around us. We don't exist without nature. Nature is the life support system on Earth. And if we don't have a support system that functions, well, there will be no life, and that will have consequences for us.
Right.
So Switzerland allows you to measure these three dimensions in quite a simple way that then translate into the produced capital, which is the one we use for exchanging. But the human, the social, and the natural capitals are measurable in Switzerland in a very good way.
Can you talk some more about that? What do you mean by measurable exactly?
So I'm talking about bringing about a new type of accounting. When I move from left to right, at the moment I look at the cost of this move and can I do that profitably?
Right.
In fact, when I go to left to right, I have an impact on the social capital because the rest of the world is watching me doing this.
Okay.
I have an impact on the human capital because the people doing it have to do something. Right. And I have, obviously, an impact on nature. We use nature because we think it is for free and inexhaustible, And it is neither of the two. It has a cost, and there's not that much of it. We're getting to the limits of it.
Yeah, yeah. But what about this measurability? I mean, for example, I could understand if you actually measured something in the physical world.
Yeah.
So that would be the natural side, right? You could actually say, well, to move this thing from A to B, we had to cut down 71 trees, and we had to, do all kinds of things that are countable and measurable in some way. But these other things seem so intangible to me. How would you propose measuring that?
So there's a lot of work being done on this impact accounting system. And in fact, it looks likely to become mandatory for a publicly quoted company within the near future. The IFRS Foundation, which is the standard, so the International Financial Reporting System, which is the standard used for financial reporting, which is a foundation helping to shape financial accounts, has recently, it's been 3 years now, started an initiative called the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, ISSB. And they are working into agreeing on a metric which will allow to measure the impact that are on these free capitals and understanding the interdependency of the free capitals before getting to this financial value. And that's making huge progress at the moment, and I think that's something we should encourage. By the way, the Americans do one as well. Of course, they don't do the same accounting as we do, but they do an accounting that is similar. Right. And the idea being that you should find the real price for things and not just the financial price.
Yeah, in principle, I understand that. But it's this idea of actually coming up with a number that it challenges my understanding a little bit. And I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just kind of curious how that works, because I would think a lot of the things you would have to make some assumptions about. Well, this has a certain cost which we can't actually see. It's invisible to us because it's happening in the minds of 100 people, for example, but yet you have to assign some kind of a Swiss franc figure to that, for example, in order to be able to compare the full costs of moving this thing from A to B, or not doing it, or moving it from A to C, for example. And so I'm not trying to be...
there are a couple of answers to that. Answer number one is, of course, that if you want to put something on the balance sheet, you need to recognize it first.
Yeah.
So you need to define a product, some transaction possibility.
Right.
It's the same way with the financial accounting. What you put on the balance sheet is an opinion. It's not a reality.
Yes, that's true.
The turnover is a reality.
Yes.
All the rest is an opinion. A profit is just after taking this account or this depreciation or this drawing back. So, I mean, it's, intellectually, we've already been there, and we can do some of that.
Okay.
But I don't want to be sounding like if I am sort of against value creation. I'm a capitalist. I'm a personification of capitalism. I'm a big shareholder. I do these things. But for me, it's clear that the model that we have used to create prosperity, very much based on, we were looking at the picture of Chicago before, very much based on the Chicago School of Economics of the late 70s. Right. Nobel Prize winner for Milton Friedman in 1976. Right. This idea of the business of business is business. The best way of running an enterprise is to look at a profit. And, whatever you do, you maximize the short-term profit, and that's something that's going to give you the prosperity that society needs. Yeah. And, it hasn't worked badly. When I was born, when I came on the planet, we were about 3.2, 3.3 billion people on the planet. We are 8 billion now and growing. And the 8 billion people today live longer lives, better educated lives than the 3 billion did at the time. Yeah. So, we haven't done everything wrong. Some things we've done very right. But the symptoms of that system, the show that it is not going to help us to do the next push. Not only when there were going to be more people, but keep the same level of prosperity is going to become more and more difficult. Yeah. We have the climate change, we have the plastic pollution, we have deteriorating health. I mean, that's a subject I'm quite close on. We have the anger and angst in the community of young people in general. I mean, I do have children, and I can see how that is functioning. Yeah. I can also look at the profitability decreasing in a number of sectors. I can see the yield in agricultural ground. The crops are going down. I mean, there are lots of symbols which are or rather symptoms, sorry, which are showing that actual system, the modus operandi of today, is not fit for purpose. We need to change it. And that's why I think it's important to just not look at financial consideration, but at impact.
Yeah.
What are the consequences of our action on that system? Yeah. If we can't sort of stabilize that, if we can't really understand the interdependency of these free capitals, to produce the value we need, we're never going to be a sustainable model.
Mm-hmm. How much of that would come about through regulation, and how much of that would come about just because the decision makers in the organization take this way of thinking on board and say, we have to change. We don't need you to make rules. We know that we have to do that.
Big conversation here, but I think capitalism is very good at doing three things. It's very good at investing, asset allocation. Mm-hmm. I'm going to choose where I'm going to put my money. Right. And by the way, if I do have good impact accounting, it should help me to actually do the right investment. Yes, because it's an investment tool and not just. It's an asset allocation tool and not just.
You measure the return in a different way, right? Yeah.
So that would be number one. The second thing that capitalism does is risk management. How do we? Once I have invested into this coffee cup, how can I protect it? How can I make sure that the money that I've invested is not being destroyed by some phenomenon? Mm-hmm. Not looking at the risk of the future and at planetary boundaries being overridden, frankly, it's just not professional. Yeah. It's happening everywhere, left, right, and center. We can see the costs rising.
You have a responsibility to think.
And you have a responsibility as a manager to do that. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. But the third thing that capitalism does is competition. Uh-huh. And at the moment, in our business model, competition is won by the cheapest. And that's why we need regulation.
Often, yeah.
That's why we need regulation. If we don't have regulation to create a level playing field, we're not going to be judged on the right criteria. So I come from a regulated industry. Health and pharmaceuticals is something where we are used to talk to the regulator regularly, right. And I like that. I think it's a good idea to be regulated. Yeah. The interest of the many should be at least as important as the interest of my shareholders.
Okay, that's fair enough. But let's talk about this regulation a little bit, especially as it pertains to competition. Once you start regulating the competition, you do level the playing field, but don't you also eliminate some of the incentives for further innovation, for example? Because to make the investment, right? That will have some kind of future return in a competitive world. What you're hoping for, obviously. Now, this leaves aside the happiness issue for the moment, right?
But that's the only one that matters. Come on. But okay,
well,
I'll listen.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Indulge me for a moment.
Yes.
But you would need to have the confidence. Okay, there's never a guarantee, but you need to have the confidence that this innovation that you're going to invest in would spin off some kind of a return, and this would be a financial return among other kinds of return. Maybe the only way that can happen is if you are able to compete properly against your competitive set. And if regulation would actually somehow dampen that competition. I mean, there are a lot of ways you could do that. Yeah. It doesn't have to be price regulations, although, as you said, this is kind of the be all and end all for competition in a lot of industries. But how could you sort of get your hands on competition and soften it somehow and still maintain the wish on the part of the organizations that are being regulated to stay in business if they don't see the same level of financial return? Now, they might see fantastic returns in terms of happiness and societal value, things like that. I get that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I could argue both sides of this of the coin here, but is that enough? I guess that's what it comes down to. Is that enough in the business world to make people change their behavior?
We need to agree on what innovation is. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Innovation is doing something that hasn't been done before. The model today is price sensitive and it's price competitive. Now, when I said, the person who wins the market is the cheapest one, you said sometimes. This was your reaction. You were sort of taken by surprise by that assumption. And it's true that there are ways of differentiating products which are not just price-based.
Right.
Because you can use innovation to do something different. In the pharmaceutical industry, innovation is not to get a process cheaper. Innovation is to help us to treat something that does not exist yet. Something that exists, but where the treatment does not exist yet.
Yes, hasn't been treated.
And I think innovation can be used in many ways, even in a regulated environment, as long as you concentrate on the attributes that you would wish your product to have.
Yes.
If the only thing you want to do is to have it cheapest, which is the model we have in a deregulated environment,
right,
then you cannot get to something that will profit to all. What we really are talking here is going from the me to the we. How do we make sure that it's not just my product, but that it is the need we have collectively?
Yes, right.
How do we manage the global common in the best possible way?
Yeah.
And managing the global common is not about extracting or polluting the system. It's about regenerating. It's about bringing back.
Yeah.
And that's where I would like to see industry. I would like to see the general commerce going back to. Yeah. We are not doing things just for us. We are doing things for everybody.
Right.
And for instance, the Latin basis of the word company, compane, eating bread together, doing things together, so that we have prosperity. It's not about one business model winning. It's not about the winner takes all. It's about the value creation benefiting the system, and that means that we can stay within planetary boundaries, and that means that you can create the sustainable prosperity that the book is trying to speak about.
Right. I mean, you
to write about. I think you say in English. Sorry.
Sorry. To say, right?
Okay, thank you.
To express, and very successfully also. But I don't want to say but. I sound like we're getting into an argument here, and that's not my intention.
No,
but it's a really interesting conversation, and I find myself as an MBA and a business person myself, sort of just naturally falling into the side of the argument that says, but no, we can't do that. I mean, the expression, the tragedy of the commons.
Of course,
right?
Of course.
And
I know the phenomenon as well, sadly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, if everyone is co-responsible for everything, then everyone thinks, but the other person will take care of that, and they'll take a little bit more than their fair share, or they won't look after they won't take their responsibilities to do their fair share of maintaining whatever this common property is, right? I think that's the gist of the tragedy of the commons. And of course, what happens then as time goes by is whatever was this common property ends up just disintegrating, collapsing, or losing all of its value because no one really took proper care of it. And I think the lesson that's usually applied to that is it's all about ownership and the value also to the other people in the commons of having private ownership guaranteed. And I guess this is even one of the issues, isn't it, that's been occasionally kind of put forward to countries that have maybe recently emerged from the communist world a generation or so ago, that they needed to look after this whole idea of the rule of law, but also private ownership rights, because as long as they said everything belongs to everyone, it's a kind of a guarantee for things falling apart. So what do you think about that?
I'm going to request a leap of imagination.
Okay.
From you. We are not for left and right.
Yeah.
We are not me or us. We are collectively in the system, and we need to make sure that whatever there is as natural resources available are used in a way which is not pollutive. Which is not extractive, which is not polluting, but which is regenerative. Because we consume more than the earth can give us.
Yeah.
So how are we going to be able to do that if we only look after the private interest? The idea of the winner takes all is something that has led us to the destruction of the environment as we know it today.
Yeah.
We need to understand prosperity as being something which is not unequal as the one we see at the moment, but as something that is more caring about the other, which is the sort of philosophy we were talking about before. The being rich on alone is not a good way of sharing the values we want to share.
Right.
We need to be able to work together. Right. So I went to business school and I was told, the business of business is business. Your role as an freshly minted MBA is to go into company and to maximize shareholder value. But if you do that in a way where you make the system around you poorer, and we have made the system poorer, you are putting into danger your own future as a company. You cannot hope that the company will service a market which will disappear because of lack of resources.
Right.
If the fossil fuels continue to make this tremendous amount of money they make at the moment, at some stage it will destroy the planet. And once the planet is destroyed, what will all this money be for? I mean, we need to translate our economic activity and our value creation into something else than just cash. We need to talk about contribution and regeneration. And we all know that, this is the thing that always sort of staggers me. It is the brain is divided in two. It is a brain that knows and there's a brain that does. Now, I ask anybody in the street, they all know that the system actually is self-destructive. We're going, not actually, the system at the moment is self-destructive. We are going towards the precipice. We can see all signs of this. And what do we do individually? It's not my fault. It's the Americans. It's the Chinese. It's not me. But the reality of it that if not, and each one of us acts into the interest of the common good, we are going to get rid of it. We're going to destroy it. And so the idea of saying that I can every morning look at myself in the mirror and say it's okay. I know it's not right, but I still do it because by doing it I contribute to the prosperity of others. I'm afraid that's just not possible anymore. You need to be able to realize that it is your problem, individually. Jointly and severally, we need to act together to create this prosperity that we need. And we need that prosperity because otherwise people are going, as we are at the moment, being mistreated in the south and being very rich in the north. There's something that doesn't work in that distribution of richness. And so we need to, what I'm just describing is a pathology. It's schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, you need to reconcile this. You need to reconcile your ambitions with your means. You need to make sure that your frustrations are covered with something that you actively do. If you cannot commit yourself to do something to make the world a better place, well, you're not going to be very happy. You come back to this notion of.
Well, is there something that Switzerland can do? What role could Switzerland play in catalyzing this?
Well, of course, I'm completely biased since I'm Swiss and Swiss-born. Right. But one of the things I really like about our political system is this direct democracy. You can actually take action at an individual level, which will have an impact on the collective.
Yes.
And there are not many places where you can do that. The parliamentary majority will allow you to elect an MP, and then the MP will go and do what he has to do. But in Switzerland, we actually have from time to time the opportunity, in fact every quarter, the opportunity to make our views done. Yes. Of course, it encourages immobilism. It encourages people not taking risks. It encourages people saying no. But maybe a bit of stability is a good thing. This is the instrument is there, and I think that's important.
Is there something at the official level in Switzerland? I mean, some kind of a leadership role that the country can play, or it can be a role model for other countries to look at this willingness to sacrifice the extractive practices, for example, in exchange for a more sustainable future? Or do you see that happening in Switzerland at all?
So first of all, we have to separate the issue of CO2 emission and climate change from the idea of biodiversity loss, of nature destruction. Yeah?
Right.
We need to bring them back together. At the moment, when you talk about nature, people talk CO2, and when we talk about CO2, they talk about nature. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about reasonable use of natural resources at a human level. Now, Switzerland, because it allows us to consult the majority of the public quite regularly, has a model which has complete support from the population.
Yeah.
And these models of CO2 management or biodiversity control will require support by all. This is not the regulator imposing it and everybody trying to bypass it. This is something that we collectively have to live together.
Yes.
So I have no doubt that in the mind of consumers, in the mind of citizens in Switzerland, this notion of responsibility towards the environment is growing.
Yes.
We're not there yet. We still need a couple of more proof points, but independently of the political process, the conscious among the population is growing. And I think that's very important.
Right.
So that's something that Switzerland can help doing, a collective model of a better management of the global common.
Okay. The only trouble is that other countries can't necessarily change their systems to the Swiss model, right? But they certainly could look at Switzerland and say they're at the leading edge, and we need to watch and we need to learn from them.
I think the intentions and the systems are not necessarily. This is not the only way to solve it.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is that there has to be a collective conscience that we are getting at the end of one particular system. And we see it in politics at the moment. Things are going in every possible direction. Yeah. If a member of parliament gets elected to the Swiss government, he or her finds herself in a situation where they have to manage the government and not to go back to their parties all the time to get instructions.
Right.
In a lot of other parliamentary democracy, you do have this allegiance to a certain party which forces you to behave in a certain way.
Yes.
And that lack of flexibility is sometimes not very helpful, especially when you talk about the global commons.
Right. Is it too hot of a topic to ask you about nuclear energy?
That's a very good plan. Thank you. I'm trying to avoid every dogmatism in that issue. We do have a serious problem with the climate change, and that's due to fossil fuel burning. We know that.
Yeah.
We also know that mobility based on traditional engines is not the most effective way to use energy. If you want to look at the conversion of a finite body of energy into movement, electricity is much better. An electric engine has about 98-99% yield when a thermal engine will be 28 or 30. So there really is there's absolutely no excuse for not going electric in the long run.
Right.
Not tomorrow, but in the long run.
Right. Generate this electricity somehow then, right?
The argument made by the fossil fuel industry is to say, we don't want to pump petrol and burn it, but you need it, don't you? And that argument is an extremely dangerous one because that is immobilism. That's not innovation. Innovation is the one we were talking about before. We need to be able to say, yes, we do have a need for energy. How do we solve it? So closing all nuclear energy tomorrow would be a mistake because at the moment it's part of the mix. Now, finding ways of generating the same amount of energy sustainably in the long run is what the real problem is. And at the moment, at least in the figures I have seen, nuclear power plants take 10, 15, 20 years to build.
Right.
And then another 2 years to be commissioned. We're in a hurry. We need to do things. Sun is here, wind is here, hydroelectricity is here.
Yes.
So today, if I had to allocate assets on the model we were talking about before, if I want to minimize the risk, I better go into something that's already here. Yeah. Better the bird in the bush than two in the tree. I forgot what the expression
Whatever
is.
that phrase is. Right. Exactly.
To a certain extent, you need to act immediately.
Right.
So the idea of saying nuclear is the end of the world, no, it's not. But it is an over-allocation of resources to a technology that until now does not really yield all the things we would like it to yield.
Interesting. I mean, you could make the argument, couldn't you, that if it takes 17 years before a nuclear power plant would actually be online and producing energy, then there's no time to lose. Let's get started right now, right?
Sure. But you could also make the argument that all that money that you're going to put during the 17 years, you could put it to work somewhere else in a much more efficient way.
Yeah.
By the way, that's a business.
Yeah.
That's management.
Right.
That's allocation of resources.
Right.
And that's the question we have to do.
Yeah.
Sadly, the water has been muddied by a number of companies doing so well from the status quo that they are trying to stop it moving.
Yeah.
The lobbying in parliament of all the governments on the planet is more resourced by the people who are successful now than by the people who are going to be successful in the future.
Sure. I think that's always been the case in every industry, right?
Remember Groucho Marx expression, what should I do for the next generation? What did they ever do for me?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, let's talk a little bit about your opinion, if you are willing to share it, of how Switzerland is doing in this area. And do you feel that that Switzerland is a leader, a laggard, or somewhere in between, as far as actually kind of making these kinds of changes is concerned?
So maybe I should start by apologizing a little bit. When I was a student, I was volunteering for WWF and a couple of other NGOs, conservation NGOs. And one of the things we got very engaged in was the theory of acid rain. I don't know if you remember that. Sure. We were going to lose all our forests because the rain is turning acid. Well, we have more forests now than we did at the time.
Right.
We cried wolf a little bit early, let's put it this way. And I think that there is a need, and not a need, an obligation for governments to manage in the long term. And so reacting quickly to each short-term issue is a little bit dangerous. Right. It's a dangerous way of doing business or politics. It's something you shouldn't be doing. But today, the fact that the climate, that we are reaching planetary boundaries is absolutely clear. I mean, this is unequivocal. So today, the managers of the public goods should go more and more towards creating a sustainable future. And frankly, it should be independent of investment levels. We need all hands on deck.
Yeah, but Switzerland is famous for long-term thinking anyway, right? Do you see that in this issue as well, in this area?
It's a vast, multifaceted thing. If you look at what's happening in agriculture, for instance, yields are decreasing, and there are two ways you can deal with that. You can reintroduce a bit of life into the system, or you can go full blast onto mineral fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides. And frankly, the parliament seems to be very divided on this. I'm not quite sure which direction we are going to go going forward. I mean, I respect the work of the farmer like anybody, but the idea that you must produce at the cheapest possible cost at all time is exactly the sort of logic which has destroyed the system on a number of occasions. So we should be careful about this. Now, if you look at mobility, a small country, very mobile, practically everybody in Switzerland goes from town to town regularly. Right. The road system is overflowing. The public system seems to be very busy at the moment. We need to decide in that direction, and that means investment, and that means investing from somewhere else. Same with education, same with a number of different, because good education, well-functioning university is a way of bringing the new nature of business about.
Yeah.
We will not save the Amazon if we don't increase the level of education or decrease the level of inequalities. Yeah. It's linked. Yeah?
Sure.
The social, the human, and the natural are linked.
Yeah. I think you and I both did our MBAs probably around the same time in the early 80s for me, in my case. But
I'm not going to embarrass you.
No. Well, but the interesting thing is that I haven't kept up with the curriculum. So but I'm just wondering if you have with INSEAD, for example, if you know that maybe part of what they are focused on now is actually teaching this mindset, which is all about conserving resources and being a good steward of the planet rather than just exploiting it for a maximum return.
I think we need to go back to the origin of what the MBA curriculum was. After the Big Depression and at the time of the creation of the Federal Reserve in the US, came this idea that it is we cannot leave people who are just in position of power to be managing. They have to be in position of power because they manage properly.
Yeah.
And then comes this idea of a scientific MBA based on observation, based on case studies, based on how people did it before. Yeah. And that eventually went to this idea of the business of business is business, because it was the easiest way to run all this was to look at the profit, yes, at a P&L. And if you look at that, a number of companies at the time, Harvard is a good example, but in Europe a bit later on, INSEAD started saying that good management is important for humanity. Mm-hmm. At INSEAD, we define ourselves as a business school for the world.
That's nice.
And well, I think that was a pretty.
It's a slogan.
I don't know what it is now. or at the World Economic Forum, making the world a better place.
Yes.
If you want to get into that direction, you're going to have to manage what you have in a way which is beneficial to the people you do it for.
Yes.
A manager is just somebody who carries something. It's just somebody who does it for somebody else. And if you want to really do that in a proper way, you cannot just look at one dimension, which is the conversation we've been having for the last half an hour. How do we make sure that we manage in a way that satisfies the majority of the participants into the system? In order to do that, you need to amend the curriculum of the MBA by taking it away from the business of business and business and bringing it into the management of the global commons.
Yes.
So a couple of schools have gone that way. It's still a bit tentative. It's still, it's so much simpler to rely on the profit and loss.
It's very straightforward, right? It's like, I get that. This is what I'm supposed to do. Boom.
Sure. The complexity is terrifying,
Yeah.
But nature, if we come back to nature as a model, nature is absolute chaos,
Yes.
You cannot impose linearity on nature.
Right.
You cannot say there's only one way of doing it.
Right.
It redefines itself all the time. It's stochastic, it's chaotic, it's all over the place. And so the idea of saying we are going to use our engineer's mind, and we're going to systematically modelize everything you can do because it already leads to the same result, I'm sorry, that's just not true.
Yeah.
This big fallacy of if we stay under 1.5 degrees of global heating, we are going to be fine. Some people will, some other will not, because the climate will change in different ways in different places.
Right.
And nature will react in different places in different
Right.
ways. So the idea of saying we've got it licked because we're going to reduce CO2, I'm sorry, that's just not true. It's about nature, it's about complexity, it's about biodiversity, it's about all sorts of things which we cannot control just with a scientific mind. And the same thing is applied to the MBA. If the curriculum is just to say, if you lower cost and you increase price, you will be profitable. No, not always. Yeah. Sometimes.
You'll get your promotion.
Exactly. Yeah. You get the promotion. That's exactly
right.
We've done a bit of work at the INSEAD Institute with the rating that different magazines give to business schools.
Yes.
The biggest way of measuring the success of one particular program is what they call the salary lift.
Yes.
You enter, you're at that level. When you come out, you are much more.
Yes.
And that difference is what gives the value to your degree.
Yeah.
It's a bit simple, isn't it?
Pretty simple. Pretty easy to measure anyway. And every single individual can measure it for himself, right?
But the same engineer who tell you need to sort of simplify or codify everything is the one who will tell you that in a complex equation, if you overprivilege some of the parameters, you're going to get unexpected consequences, collateral damages.
Yeah.
So if we suddenly say the only way to deal with the climate is to reduce CO2, let's plant trees everywhere, thereby destroying the ecosystem in which this tree live. Grow.
We don't think of it that way, but yes, of course it would. It would.
Because you reduce CO2, of course you do, but that's not enough.
Right. Yeah. Of course, the old saying, what gets measured gets managed, right?
Well,
so if you can't measure the results of some kind of an action towards the environment, for example, or towards society even, it's one of those things that people don't know how to reward you for. They don't even know how they're how will they know that they were successful. What would you on that? How would you say, how would Switzerland or you personally know that something has been successful in this arena 5 years from now?
But first of all, thank you for quoting that. What gets measured gets managed is precisely the idea behind this new accounting system, which I would like to see happening. We need to measure impact, because otherwise you won't manage it.
Right.
We have this approach towards nature where we say nature is cheap, free, gratuit, but on the and unending, inexhaustible, which is of course not true. It has a price, and there is a finite amount.
Right.
And so if we really want to be able to manage that, just the cost is not going to be enough. We're going to have to understand the different things. So I agree, what gets managed, what gets measured gets managed, and therefore we need measurements, number one. And number two, sorry, I forgot the question. Sorry.
Well, I was just wondering how would you recognize success in this area? This is a big, amorphous, chaotic, to use your word, world. And there are a lot of areas that need attention and improvement. But how, for example, 5 years from now or 10 years from now, however long you want to choose as a time horizon, how would you know, what are the kinds of things that you would look for to say, yes, we've done a good job or we're doing a good job in these areas?
So I'll give you the example of our family company. Started 128 years ago. We employ more than 100,000 people.
100,000?
Yeah, 108,000 at the moment. We have about 50 million consumers a year
Yes.
who take our drugs. Not all of them are cured, but a lot of them are.
Right.
Because,
But they're all treated anyway, that's for sure.
And we've been doing that consistently for the past 128 years. I think that's quite a good measure of success. In the meantime, our capital is being looked after because we pay a dividend. It's not the biggest one in the industry, but it's a dividend which allows us to retain sufficient earnings to go on investing in research to allow us to start the cycle again.
Right.
So maybe the answer is very simple to your question: long term. Short term in the profit maximization thing is what actually kills us. We need to think long term. If I well, the real question is how much is enough, but that's perhaps another debate, the subject of another.
But step outside the company for a second, and now it's just André Hoffmann, human being, right? And you are looking around at the world around you, and it's the year 2035. What do you hope to see that would tell you that Switzerland, let's just be a little specific here, has been successful in moving in the right direction in some of these important areas?
Well, the state of nature plays a role, and the new technologies that everybody is talking about, these incredible computer powers we're creating, these big data sets which we can now use for taking decisions, are also a way of reading the amount of success we'll be having in managing the global commons.
True.
Biodiversity is a metric that you can measure. You can measure it better and better, and you can measure it over time, which is, I think, an important issue. So we could say that, just a slight parenthesis, in a couple of days' time, we're going to get to the day where Switzerland moves from the income of its national capital to starting to eat the capital.
Oh,
so
is that right? In a couple of days.
In a couple of days' time. I read that today. It's true. But I used to chair for a while an organization based in California called the Footprint Network. And we calculated the yield of the planet and the needs of humanity and trying to sort of align them in a way where we can say, if we translate the need of each individual into a surface, what would that mean in terms of global limits? And at the moment, humanity...
In terms of square meters?
In terms of square meter, hectares, yeah.
Interesting.
And at the moment, for instance, humanity needs about 3.8 planets every year. So
3.8 planets.
Planets. So you look at the income of the planet, and if you only spend the income, well, then you're on for eternity. You can go on for a long time.
Yeah.
But since about 40 years, we're starting more and more to use the capital. In other words, we consume nature more than what nature can regenerate.
Right.
And the consequences are, of course, that we are getting to the end of the system. We're getting to the end, this is the precipice I was talking about. And there it strikes me that if we succeed in going a bit further from the precipice, that would be success for the system. A company that succeeds in making a profitable business out of regeneration is helping humanity.
Okay. Is there an example of a company that you would call out as...
Of course.
Roche. I'm sorry I even didn't come up with that myself.
No, but there are a number of people. I mean, it depends on the business model, of course. But if you want to have sustainability, you need to earn more than you spend.
Yeah.
So we come back to this idea of profitability before, but we need to define it differently. Hence, a different accounting system. Hence, the interdependency on the free capital.
Yeah. I mean, the trouble is, I think the mentality almost everywhere in the world is a deficit spending, right? And we're selling the family silverware almost everywhere to pay for the things we want to consume today. And there's a limit to that, obviously.
And at the moment, and if you talk about Switzerland in particular, we're able to externalize the majority of the costs by compensating for the value creation, the need of natural resources. So it's the developing world or the least developed economies who bring us to what we need at the cost to them.
Yeah. Let me ask you one final question. Personally, are you optimistic or pessimistic about this future?
Well, you won't be surprised to hear that that is a question that comes on the table rather quickly, of course. What does it look like in the future? So I used to be the vice chair of WWF International, the World Wide Fund for Nature, and we used to raise funds to save the planet. Yeah, we still do, of course, but I'm not part of it anymore.
Right.
So we raise funds by to put into nature conservation. Conservation being the same as a museum. You take something beautiful, you put it aside, and so you protect against people rather than protecting for and with people, which is really what we are talking about in that book.
Okay.
And the idea that we are taking not conscious, but that we are more and more internalizing the reality that we need to protect the planet that carries us, because otherwise the human journey on the planet is getting shorter. That reality is coming more and more to people. It creates enormous anxiety, and we've had the opportunity to discuss that a couple of minutes ago. It doesn't make at the moment action obvious, and yet it should be an obvious thing. If we don't change the way we function, we are not going to be able to make it in the long term. And that is something that on one side excites me, because that proves, that's a call to action.
Sure.
And on the other side, it's something that rather depresses me, because I see very little movement. So the idea of saying I am broadly optimistic by nature, we will not convince people, or we will not convince humanity, we will not be able to carry everybody along to change the modus operandi if we don't sell a bit of hope, if we don't sort of talk about something that's going to be better.
Right.
But at the moment, it's not obvious.
Oh.
So it's a bit of a side way to answer.
No. It's interesting, and it's very realistic, because I don't know if I would have necessarily believed you if you said that you were only one or the other, but that I can understand that the two things are very they're not just two feelings that you have, but they're completely intermixed, and dependent on each other. So
but there's one aspect of the whole value creation that we haven't really discussed, and maybe that's not relevant, but when I spoke about WWF, this idea came to my mind. For a lot of people in the economic system, it's okay to make money as long as you give something back. This notion of giving back, which is a very American notion, by the way. For me, giving back implies that I have taken. And I have not taken. I have helped other people together to do something. That's not the same. But the key issue is that the idea of thinking that being philanthropically minded allows you to act immorally or amorally in the market is something we really need to do something about. When you talk to business people and you say, but your model destroys nature. Oh, yes, it's okay, because I pay for the local school. Not good enough. We need to really put everything into what we do. It's not how you spend the money that matters, it's how you make it.
I think on that note, let's call it a day. This was a really interesting conversation, Andre. Thank you very much.
Very good questions. Thank you. I'm sweating.
Yeah, that can't be me. I didn't put you in that much pressure, but I appreciate the openness that you have towards this subject. It's just it's amazing, and I'm hopeful that we will tackle these things, but it's a big challenge, and not sure how it's going to work out.
I often get the question, what should we do? For me, the real issue is just start. Do something. Start.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, help the old lady to cross the street. That's good. That's contributing to social capital, and that will lead to something,
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Maintenant, c'est là, quand vous dites, ça n'a pas marché, on recommence. Ça, non?